Hello and welcome. In this video I want to cover a common question that we often receive in our customer support chat. The question is, how do you add the latest time series value to endpoint metadata? To clarify, I have an endpoint with a time series, which is the temperature in my case, and we want its latest value to be placed into metadata. But why would this be useful? Well, because it's an easy way to store values that describe the current state of the endpoint. For example, we can store its coordinates, the date of its last maintenance, or even the total number of units the endpoint has captured throughout its operation. This also makes it much easier to access those values later on without needing to query the endpoint's entire history. Okay, so how do we accomplish this task? To do that, we need to use the Kaa rule engine. It's a separate service located here, so let's open it up. The rule engine is a tool that lets us create rules, and those rules run your code based on specific conditions or events. I already have a few rules from past videos, so please ignore those. Let's just create a new one. A rule is made of three parts: trigger, condition, and action. Let's go over each part one by one. Starting with the trigger, this is where we define when the rule should start running. For trigger name, I like to have it the same as the rule name. Later on, it's easier to understand which trigger belongs to which rule. For trigger type, we have a few options available. By looking at the trigger names, we can assume when each one of these will activate. For our task, we want to update metadata with the latest time series value, so the endpoint time series updated trigger is exactly what we need. A few more fields appeared. These are needed to select which endpoints I want the trigger to work for, so I'm working my way down the list. By the way, if you're confused about the terminology, like what a data sample or time series is, I'll leave some links in the description. But just keep in mind that in our case the time series is the temperature. Okay, so that's all for the trigger. Let's move on to condition. In the condition, we specify the logic for this rule. This is where we validate the data we receive from various sources and run some JavaScript code. At the end of every condition, we return either true or false, and depending on the result, a specific action will be executed. Our task is quite simple, we don't need any validation or additional API calls, so I'm just returning true and moving on to the next step. Now let's talk about actions. Actions are performed after a condition is met. An action can be positive or negative, meaning it runs depending on the outcome of the condition. Our condition always returns true, so my action should be positive. For action types, I'm selecting metadata update. For the name, same approach as with the trigger, I like to keep actions and triggers named the same as the rule that applies them. For an endpoint, we can either select use current endpoint, the one on which the trigger is fired, or define our own with a script. That's not necessary right now, so I will just skip. For the metadata key, I specify the name under which my value will be stored in the metadata. Lastly, in the expression, I need to return the actual value I want to assign to the metadata key. To update metadata, we first need to retrieve the latest time series value. We can do this using the CTX object. The CTX object contains all the information passed between different parts of Kaa platform. What this means is when a trigger fires on a specific endpoint, in my case it's endpoint 1, all the information about the endpoint is passed into CTX. We do have documentation that explains the structure of the CTX object, but if you don't want to read through it, you can simply explore the CTX object using IntelliSense and review the description of each method, which is what I am doing in this video. Additionally, you can console.log the results. Next, let's save the rule and see what happens with our endpoint. As you can see, when the endpoint receives a new value, the metadata updates accordingly. If you don't see the expected results, that means something went wrong and we need to debug it. Let's take a look at how to do that. I'm going back to the rule engine. In the rule engine, we have a tracing tab. This is where we can view all rules that were executed on your account. You can also view traces directly from the rule page. Let's check the traces from there. At the top, click Show Traces and scroll down. The list is empty for now, but it will update as soon as the rule executes. From here, any errors should give you a clue on how to fix the issue. If that doesn't help, you have to use console.log to output results and narrow down the problem step by step. Okay, that should cover the question on how to update the metadata with latest time series value. Ask your questions in the comments to point out what you would like to cover next, or to specify what you'd like to be explained in more details. I hope it was helpful to you, and thank you for watching.